Okay, so somebody at Marvel just spent actual studio money to make a 7-year-old movie look like a different movie. Not a new cut, not extended scenes. They took footage you've already seen, footage some of you have seen dozens of times, and they quietly repainted it. Brighter skin tones, punchier reds, blacks that actually go black instead of that murky battlefield gray we all just accepted as how Marvel movies look. And they didn't do it for fun. They did it because in 3 weeks, they need you walking out of a theater believing Avengers Endgame was building towards something even bigger, something called Doomsday. And the version of Endgame that's been sitting in your memory for 7 years doesn't quite sell that story anymore. So they fixed it, literally, technically, colorimetrically fixed it. Today, we're breaking down exactly what changed, why one single line of dialogue might be the most important 4 seconds in this entire re-release, and why the guy doing the color grade on this thing has a resume that tells you everything about where Marvel cinematography is headed next. Let's get into it.
Let's set the table first, because the numbers here are genuinely wild. Marvel and Disney are putting Avengers Endgame back in theaters starting September 25th under a new name, Avengers Endgame Encore. And they've dressed it up as a full theatrical event. A new custom intro, roughly 4 extra minutes of previously unseen footage, and a brand new post-credit scene that's explicitly built to connect into Doomsday. It's also carrying Disney's new Infinity Vision branding, which is basically a stamp Disney slaps on premium large format screens, IMAX, 4DX, Dolby Cinema, to guarantee you're getting the brightest, sharpest possible presentation. Here's the part that should make you sit up though. Tickets for Encore went on sale just 2 days ago, and within hours, it had already broken the pre-sale record for a movie re-release this century, beating out Titanic's 3D re-release, which had held that record for well over a decade. Industry trackers are currently projecting somewhere in the $20 to $28 million range for its opening weekend domestically. Now, stack that up against what Endgame did in 2019, a $350 million opening weekend, the biggest in history at the time, and sure, 20-something million looks tiny by comparison. But you have to remember what this actually is. A 6-year-old movie competing against new theatrical releases, and it's still projected to outperform most brand new studio movies on a random September weekend. That's not nostalgia. That's a marketing machine working exactly as designed. And there's an actual box office record on the line here too. As of right now, Endgame's lifetime global total sits at around $2.799 billion. Avatar is still sitting on top at $2.923 billion. That gap, call it $124 million, is close enough that Marvel absolutely has a shot at reclaiming the all-time box office crown they briefly held back in 2019 before Avatar's own re-release clawed it back. Whether Endgame Encore actually closes that gap is genuinely uncertain. It would need a monster overseas run to get there. But you can bet that's part of why this rollout exists at all. So we've got a financial motive and a promotional motive tangled together here. Encore isn't just, hey, come relive a classic. It's a chess move, and the recoloring is one of the pieces on that board.
Now let's talk about what's inside this new trailer for Encore, because the footage selection is not random. Nothing in a Marvel marketing department is ever random. The trailer opens on a wounded, exhausted Steve Rogers, cinching his broken shield strap around his arm in the middle of the Battle of Earth, arguably the most vulnerable Captain America ever looked in 11 years of movies. Then it cuts to the On Your Left callback, audio. Then straight into the theater reaction footage from opening night 2019. People screaming and losing it the second that portal opens. That's a smart edit, because it's not selling you the movie, it's selling you the feeling of being in a crowd when the movie hit. That's exactly the communal experience Marvel needs to recreate to justify a re-release in the first place. From there, it moves through basically a highlight reel of the entire time heist arc and the Battle of Earth. The portals opening one by one, Cap catching Mjolnir, Thanos and his army lined up on the other side, the time heist mission briefings, Nebula's glitching double cross, Tony's message to Pepper recorded in space, Clint and Natasha on Vormir, the Ancient One and Bruce Banner on the astral plane, young Loki grabbing the Tesseract and bolting, which by the way is a very deliberate reminder for anyone who watched the Loki series, since that exact moment is literally where that whole show spins out from. And then obviously it closes on the emotional peaks. Smart Hulk snapping everyone back, and Tony's final I am Iron Man sacrifice. If you strip away the nostalgia for a second, What you're actually looking at is a highlight reel engineered to touch every single storyline Marvel still has threads running through. Loki, the multiverse, Peggy Carter, the Stones, the legacy characters. This isn't a best-of reel, it's connective tissue.
Here's the detail almost nobody's talking about yet, and it might be the single most interesting thing in this entire trailer. Right after the compound gets bombed in the 2019 film, Tony Stark delivers this line to the team: "You mess with time, it tends to mess back." One sentence, one breath, said almost like a throwaway. In the new Encore trailer, that same moment plays differently. It's now delivered as two separate beats. You mess with time, time tends to mess back. A pause where there wasn't one before. That's subtle enough that 90% of the audience will never consciously register it, but it's not nothing. Either Robert Downey Jr. went back into a booth and re-recorded that line, or Marvel pulled an alternate take that's been sitting unused in the archives since 2019. And either way, somebody made a deliberate choice to slow that line down and let it breathe. Think about what that line has represented for 7 years. Back in 2019, fans treated it as a warning shot about unintended multiversal consequences, something that eventually got tied to Kang the Conqueror once Marvel started building that direction. But Kang, as most of you know, effectively got benched after the recasting situation. The multiverse saga's new center of gravity is Victor Von Doom, played in one of the more audacious casting swerves in blockbuster history by the same actor who spent a decade as Tony Stark. So recutting this exact line, giving it new weight, new pacing, right as Marvel pivots the entire saga toward a villain played by Robert Downey Jr., that doesn't feel like an accident to me. It feels like Marvel quietly reframing Tony's own words as a prophecy about Doom, delivered by the actor who's about to become Doom. If Doomsday does anything with this line in flashback form, you heard the theory here first.
All right, let's get into the technical stuff, because this is where it gets genuinely interesting from a filmmaking standpoint and not just a marketing one. Side by side, the differences are not subtle once you know where to look. That opening shot of Steve's arm wound in the 2019 cut, it barely reads as an injury, kind of just looks smudged. In the Encore version, there's visible red in it. The Avengers Assemble charge shot has noticeably more contrast and saturation across the board. Wanda's red magic energy, which used to sort of blend into the background haze, now genuinely glows. Thanos himself reads as a much richer, more saturated purple instead of the flatter grayish tone he had in the original release. And that shot of Smart Hulk mid-snap screaming through the gauntlet, in Encore, it looked like it was regraded specifically to pop on a modern HDR display, like a 4K thumbnail someone ran an Instagram filter over. The person doing this regrade work is a colorist named Tom Poole, co-founder of a firm called Company 3, who also handled the color work on Spider-Man Brand New Day earlier this year. Now, full transparency, we don't actually know for certain whether Poole personally touched the specific Encore regrade, but he's the credited colorist associated with the current slate, so it's a reasonable through line to draw. Here's the important context though. A colorist doesn't work alone. The look of any Marvel movie is the product of about 5 people working in concert: the director, the cinematographer, the production designer, the costume designer, and the colorist. And the colorist's entire job by design is to serve their collective vision, not to stand out on their own. So when we talk about the Marvel look changing, we're really talking about a changing of the guard behind the camera entirely. And that guard really is changing. Endgame in 2019 was shot by Trent Opelka, a Canadian cinematographer who cut his teeth working with Neil Blomkamp on District 9, Elysium, and Chappie before he became the Russo brothers' go-to guy for the back half of the Infinity Saga. Doomsday, on the other hand, is being shot by Newton Thomas Sigel, a veteran DP who's worked with the Russos on their non-Marvel projects like Extraction and Cherry, and who, notably, also shot a big chunk of the Fox X-Men movies, which, given that Doomsday is functionally merging the MCU, the Fantastic Four's universe, and the old Foxman universe into one story, feels like a genuinely inspired hire. The guy who shot the X-Men now gets to shoot them meeting the Avengers. Now, if you were around for the online film discourse in the back half of the 2010s, you'll remember this wasn't always praised. Marvel took real criticism during this stretch for its color grading. Specifically that desaturated, almost bleached out look in the Civil War airport battle, and the murky gray-purple wash over the entire Battle of Earth in the original Endgame cut. There's a whole cottage industry of YouTube video essays dedicated to exactly this complaint, some pointing to the specific camera and lighting choices that flattened black levels on those Arri Alexa digital cameras, others digging into a genuinely tricky color theory problem that's unique to crossover movies. When you've got a dozen heroes on screen simultaneously, simultaneously, each with their own signature color, red and gold, green, purple, blue, colorists often end up desaturating the background just to keep the whole frame from turning into visual noise. That's a real, defensible, creative problem. It's just one a lot of audiences felt Endgame solved by making everyone look like they'd been rolling around in a gravel pit. And look, I actually think that grimy, suit-covered aesthetic did real emotional work in the moment. It sold the exhaustion and the stakes of the final battle. But with 7 years of distance, it also reads as very much of its era. The same era that gave us the equally desaturated Battle of Hogwarts in the last Harry Potter film. High contrast, low color, this is serious now filmmaking, which was everywhere in blockbusters around that time. Compare that to the Battle of New York in the very first Avengers, back in 2012, shot by Seamus McGarvey under Joss Whedon. That sequence never sacrificed color diversity for cohesion. Every hero's palette stays distinct, the frame stays legible, and audiences still point to it as one of the best shot superhero battles ever put on screen. So it's not that vibrant, colorful superhero action doesn't work, it clearly does. It's that somewhere between 2012 and 2019, Marvel drifted toward a grittier, grayer house style, and this recolor of Endgame is, whether they'll admit it publicly or not, a quiet acknowledgement that the pendulum swung too far.
Let's zoom out, because Doomsday itself just got a lot more concrete. A second trailer dropped during Disney's D23 presentation on August 14th, and it gave us our clearest look yet at where this story's heading. In that footage, Vanessa Kirby's Sue Storm, Invisible Woman, is essentially the audience surrogate, warning the assembled heroes just how dangerous Doom really is, at one point saying simply that she knew he was lost. Short line does a lot of work. It reframes Doom less as a mustache-twirling villain and more as a tragedy the Avengers didn't catch in time. An earlier trailer, released back in July, showed Doom stopping Thor's Stormbreaker dead in midair with basically a flick of the wrist, which tells you everything about the power scale Marvel wants you walking in expecting. The confirmed cast list at this point is enormous, and it's worth just letting it sit for a second because it really is one of the biggest ensembles ever assembled for a single film. Robert Downey Jr. as Victor Von Doom, Chris Evans back as Steve Rogers, Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter, Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm, Anthony Mackie, Letitia Wright, Danny Ramirez, Paul Rudd, Simu Liu, Winston Duke, Wyatt Russell, David Harbour, Kelsey Grammer, Tenoch Huerta, Hannah John Kamen, and, pulled directly out of the old Fox X-Men universe, James Marsden and Rebecca Romijn, returning to roles most of us assumed we'd never see again on a Marvel Studios set. The Russo brothers are directing, Kevin Feige is producing, and Marvel is calling this the 39th film in the MCU. It's currently locked for a December 18, 2026 theatrical release, and yes, it's set up to lead directly into Avengers Secret Wars the following year. Put that entire cast list next to the Endgame recolor, and the picture gets a lot clearer. This isn't really about Endgame at all. Endgame is the bait. It's the familiar, emotionally loaded object Marvel is using to physically get you back into a movie theater seat in September so that by the time December rolls around, going to see Doomsday isn't even a decision anymore. It's just the next appointment on a calendar Marvel already built for you back in the spring.
Which brings us back to the actual question. Why recolor Endgame at all? I think there are two honest answers, and they're not mutually exclusive. The first is just the boring, practical one. It genuinely looks better on modern premium screens. IMAX and Dolby Cinema and 4DX are all built around bright, high contrast, high dynamic range images, and a movie graded in 2018 for standard theatrical projection is going to look muddy and flat on that kind of screen by comparison. Regrading it is just good technical hygiene if you want people paying premium ticket prices to see it. The second answer is the more interesting one, and it's basically a rewrite of how you're supposed to remember this movie. By pumping up the color, the contrast, the vibrance, Marvel is subtly repositioning Endgame in your head as more like the 2012 Avengers. Colorful, kinetic, a crossover celebration, rather than the grim, soot-caked war movie it actually was in 2019. Why would they want that? Because it sets up Doomsday to be the real dark, high-stakes showdown. If Endgame gets remembered as the fun one, Doomsday gets to inherit the "this time it's actually serious" mantle. That's a very deliberate narrative demotion of a movie
movie that used to be considered Marvel's crowning achievement, and it's happening through pure color correction without changing a single line of story. Is that a cynical read? Maybe a little, but it's also just smart, patient marketing, and honestly, the footage looks genuinely great regardless of the reasoning behind it, so take that for what it's worth. So, to recap, Endgame Encore hits theaters September 25th with new footage, a new post-credit scene, and a full-color regrade designed to bridge straight into Doomsday on December 18th. One quietly re-recorded line of Tony Stark dialogue might be foreshadowing Doom more directly than anything else in the marketing so far, and the handoff from cinematographer Trent Opelka to Newton Thomas Sigel tells you Marvel is deliberately courting the old X-Men aesthetic as three separate franchises finally collide on screen. What do you think? Is this a smart piece of long-game marketing? Or is Marvel just polishing nostalgia because they know exactly which buttons to press? Drop your take in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.